What is uninsured motorist coverage? That's our topic for today's episode of Main Street Law. I'm Cindy Speaker. My guest is Indiana personal injury attorney Randy Sevenish of Sevenish Law. Randy, how are you today?
Great, Cindy. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Well, Randy, as I understand it, knowing insurance coverage inside and out is really an important part of personal injury. And I know there's a coverage called uninsured motorist coverage, but what I'd like you to do is explain that to us today.
Well, Cindy, coverage is one of the most overlooked, ignored, and undervalued types of coverage people can have, in my opinion. And it's called for short, by the way. And aside from liability coverage that protects you when you are at fault, as well as your bank accounts, assets, wages, and so on, there is just no other more important coverage than uninsured motorist. The other one would be perhaps underinsured coverage, which is also equally as important. So to answer your question, uninsured motorist coverage protects you and those people dear to you if the wrongdoer is at fault and has no insurance and no assets or means to otherwise compensate. And then in that case, you have, in essence, purchased insurance coverage in advance for the uninsured driver.
Okay. Now, does everyone have uninsured motorist coverage? Is that mandated by law?
Unfortunately not, Cindy, and although insurance agents are required to offer coverage to people, customers can also choose not to have it, which is a very large mistake. And I've seen in my practice over recent years a very troubling trend of people choosing not to have this very valuable form of coverage, thinking they are saving money. And this is just a huge error in judgment, or perhaps just a simple lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. The problem arises when they are injured by an uninsured driver and they themselves have no coverage. They can, of course, still sue the uninsured driver, but usually these people fail to have sufficient assets to go after, and the uninsured driver can also file bankruptcy, and the injured person still gets nothing.
Well, how much uninsured motorist coverage do you recommend that people have?
Well, this will depend largely upon the risk that they themselves are actually willing to take. And unlike liability coverage, which is intended to pay someone else who was injured by them, and most often someone whom they've never met, coverage provides compensation to them directly, to family members and to their passengers. And for that reason, it only makes sense to purchase at least as much coverage as they have in liability coverage. It is the coverage that protects them and the people who are dear to them. Also, don't forget that even if they have coverage and suffer a significant injury at the hands of an uninsured driver, that their own insurance company has virtually no obligation to pay them any more than the limit that they have agreed to buy as listed on their policy, regardless of their injury and no matter how bad it is. If the wrongdoer is uninsured and you just have coverage of only $25,000, the most you'll get is only $25,000. If you have $100,000 in coverage and the wrongdoer is uninsured, the most you'll get is $100,000. But it gets much worse. If the wrongdoer not only is uninsured and you have opted not to have coverage, you get nothing. So, I hope you get the idea. So based upon their assets and comfort level, I would suggest a general rule of thumb to be roughly in the area of $250,000 per person or $500,000 per accident. And also probably beyond the scope of this interview, if they also own a home and they have coverage of $250,000, $500,000, they should also consider getting an umbrella policy of $1 to $2 million for just a couple of $100 per year.
That's great advice. Now, let me ask you something else. Do people have to be in their own vehicle to utilize uninsured motorist coverage?
Not really. What most people don't realize is that coverage under most policies covers you and your resident family members when injured by an uninsured driver, regardless of whether you are in your car, your truck, you're on your own motorcycle, moped, bicycle, in someone else's car or truck, or even not in a car, such as while walking or jogging and so on. So in that regard, coverage follows you wherever you go. I think if people knew that, then they would certainly have that coverage, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. It's kind of a no-brainer when when I understand it from that perspective. I have one final question for you, Randy. What recommendations or best advice do you have to anyone out there who has not been in an accident, but maybe is reconsidering their insurance coverage?
Well, Cindy, first of all, they need to simply accept that an accident with serious injury can happen to them, because most people frankly think, well, that won't happen to me. It happens to someone else. They have a rare opportunity to plan before it happens to them. And without any doubt or question, my best advice is to then make sure that they have plenty of coverage before it's too late. They must assume that other drivers on the road don't have insurance coverage to cover their injuries, medical bills, wage loss, mortgage payment, other bills, as well as their other damages.
Well, Randy, that's great advice, and I appreciate that. If someone wants more information, how can they reach you?
They can contact us toll-free at 1-800-278-9200 or see us online at www.sevenishlaw.com. That's SEVENISHLAW.com.
Very good. Randy, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Cindy.
This is Cindy Speaker reporting for State Law TV.